Hello, I'm Malcolm Hazlitt. Bringing up children is never easy. In this episode, we talk about the challenges and the joys when they're not yours. That's next on OurTime. And welcome to OurTime. Our special guest is Susan Lane, who has worked in the Department of Child Protection. She's a kinship carer of a grandchild, and she's worked on both sides of child protection, and she's here. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Malcolm. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, but I've got to ask you a very leading question.
Yep.
How did you get into children?
Well, I was the oldest of 5 children, and my youngest brother was born when I was 9, and I thought he was mine. So I think I started parenting at a very early age.
The 9-year-old mother.
Yep, 9-year-old mother.
There's something to be said for that.
My mum tells me that wasn't true, but I believed
No,
it.
but actually, isn't that a great setup for life when you think about it? Because by you doing that, it actually made you aware of children from a very early age, and 9 is a very early age.
It was.
It's all right to play with your brothers and
Yep.
sisters. Did you change his nappy?
Oh, probably.
Yep.
5 children under 9 is a pretty big handful. So
Well, I've got a 14-year-old nephew, grand-nephew, but we cut out the grand part, and his mum's just had a couple of young baby girls. And he does all of that stuff as just part of life.
Yep.
And how lovely for him, because he'll always be comfortable.
Yeah.
Sorry, I digress.
I think the other things were that I was an Inman hippie when it first started,
Were you?
and we had kids in the community that I was also involved with parenting, and we started an alternative childcare with the parents, hippie parents looking after it.
Can I just ask you, when you talk about the hippie parents, as hippie parents, what were you looking for in life, do you think? And did you find it?
I think we wanted to live communally. We didn't want to be stuck in nuclear families. We wanted to have a much more sustainable lifestyle. We were really looking at raising children who were creative and who were able to be themselves. We wanted to live communally. We wanted to create alternative ways of. It was a political, I suppose, in some ways, alternative.
Well, it's probably something we lost somewhere along the way with, I remember as a kid, everyone was auntie and uncle who lived around the area, and you were quite comfortable with leaving your kids with them.
Yep.
But we are going to talk about the discomfort of leaving the kids a bit later, but let's keep on your story.
Actually, I'll just say one more thing about that. I absolutely believe that it takes a village to raise a kid, and I think it probably comes from partly those days.
Yes.
And I absolutely believe that's true of the way we should be raising kids in our community, whether they're with their birth parents or not, that we actually really should be as a community supporting. Families are really having struggles so that the kids can stay with them, and to do that as a community. And also
you've got other people to assist.
Absolutely.
That's what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Perhaps with more experience bringing up children because they're older, they've been through all of that, or they just have the love of children.
Yes, and it's about, I also think when kids can't live with their families and have to live with other carers, that we all need that level of support. It still takes that village to raise the kid.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that's part of human nature, that we need to be together as units of people, that we can all trust each other. But moving back to you. So you're a 9-year-old looking after your baby brother.
And then I was an Inman hippie. And then when I came to Adelaide, I basically was working in the Department for Child Protection, working therapeutically with teenage boys who were in and out of the juvenile justice system.
And why were they in and out?
Many of them were truanting from school. They were running away from family members. Many of them had experienced violence and drug and alcohol, but not all of them.
Did some of them have what's now called ADHD or any of those now diagnosable conditions?
Probably.
Yeah. But we didn't completely understand that until recently.
No, and a lot of them were really, they were on the verge of serious criminal behaviour. They'd been caught either taking drugs or selling drugs or thieving or in aggressive acts.
Yep.
And so we were working with them. We did a lot of therapy with them in groups to look at what what was going on for them and what their decision making was and how they could do something different.
How honest could they be about their life situation?
Most of them were relatively honest. You do build a lot of trust with kids and with young people if you take them from where they're at and you listen to them and respond to them and without judgment.
I've often thought, because working in kids television for most of my life, I realised very early in the piece that you can't talk down to kids.
No.
You just need to meet them on the same level as you are.
Absolutely.
And suddenly everything opens up.
Yeah. And at the same time as that, I was living in it was a therapeutic kids shelter for young women, and it was the first one in South Australia. There was another shelter, but it was the first one for young women. There were about 5 young women at any one time, and all of them were what's called guardianship of the minister, so they'd been taken away from the parents. Every single one of them had experienced abuse and neglect and sexual abuse, some of it in the family. And it was in very early days of all of that, and most of them weren't believed. And so they were acting out and running away from home, and really vulnerable young people at risk.
You can certainly understand why you'd run away from home.
And so that's where I started working with kids and my interest in kids.
Right. But that progressed. You progressed fairly quickly.
Yeah. Well, I started working for the department actually. I was the head of staff development for the Department for Child Protection for a period of time. And I'd always thought I would have my own kids and either adopt or foster. And I couldn't have my own kids. I was infertile. And so I just moved straight into Plan B. And we started fostering kids, my partner and I, my then partner and I, and moved into wanting long-term kids. And so my daughter was 18 months when she came to live with us. And then my son was 14 months when he came to live with us.
And you were fostering them initially?
We were initially fostering them, and with my daughter we became what's called other people guardians, which means they're still, at one level, the state is still responsible for them, but really they allow you to take on full responsibility for the kids.
Right.
And we adopted my son.
As you just said, my daughter and my son.
Yeah, that's right, And so when we say, the kids aren't ours, I didn't bear them, but they were our children, and they're my and I have 5 grandchildren with those kids as well. So, and then the kids both, kids who are in care have very traumatic backgrounds. Both of my kids had very difficult backgrounds, and.
How did that affect them? Did that affect them psychologically through the birth process, do you think, or through the... I can't think of the right word, incubation process.
Look, I think there's 2 things at work, really, for kids with complex early childhood trauma. It's the actual trauma they've experienced, either in utero, because kids experience what's going on for their parents in utero, and when they're young and before.
But it could be substance abuse as well.
It could be substance abuse. It can be neglect. It can be physical violence during all that time. To the mum, and also the sorts of trauma that happens if they're staying with their parents and there's neglect or abuse of any sort. But I also think there's the impact of intergenerational poverty and abuse. And so what happens with that is that it's not in your DNA, but the triggers for your DNA have impacted by that.
Yes.
And so the kids inherit. Different. It's called neurodiversity. So their brains are wired differently because of both what's happened to them in utero and afterwards, but also because of what's happened to their parents.
Yep.
And so that means it's really hard for those kids because they're really different from birth. Right,
and also the first things you learn, which is obviously from your parents. So your reactions, I often look at a little baby and, you see those eyes looking around like this. And you realise very quickly they are taking everything. They may not be talking to me yet, but they're learning every single thing we do and say.
That absolute gaze of that newborn baby is amazing. Yep. Yeah. And so for me, because in those days what happened was that we didn't know nearly as much as we do now about all of that stuff.
Exactly.
And so I think at that time we all thought if you just put the kids in a stable, fabulous, loving environment, everything would be all right. And that's not true. And so the kids were struggling. They were fantastic kids. They're both fantastic kids, but they were also struggling. So they were struggling with learning and concentrating on learning. They struggle with social behaviours. They would get triggered by stuff and we wouldn't realise that.
I didn't understand why. That was my next question.
Yeah.
How did you cope with that? But we'll answer that just after we take a short break. Our special guest in this episode of Our Time is Susan Lane, and we're talking about child protection, which you've had a great deal of involvement with, but we were just talking before the break about not quite understanding why your children that you'd adopted would react in a certain way, and what, as a parent, I suppose you were thinking, what did I do wrong?
At that stage I was an adoptive parent or a foster parent, and sometimes I didn't know. So there were things like, I remember talking to my daughter's teacher, and the teacher saying, "Oh, we can tell the type of day that your daughter has had, or the morning she's had, when she gets to her desk over the top of it before, rather than sitting down." I went, I didn't know she was doing that. And with my son, his teacher was fantastic. So they negotiate the group norms, and she negotiated in year one that he was the only one who was allowed to roam the room fiddling with something, because she knew that he would be able to concentrate doing that. And if he had to sit, if you have to sit there, then he was not actually going to be able to concentrate and he was going to be disruptive. And to be able to negotiate that with a group of kids was fantastic at that level. So, they did, we had really good friends. And one of the things I really wanted to talk about today was about the kind of support, and that thing about it takes a village, and how when you have kids who come with those complex traumas and those complex behaviours, how important it is as carers to actually create that support for yourself and get that support for yourself and to build that up around them. And so one of the things that often happens is that people talk about respite care for carers, and I've done a big project about this, and what carers hate it, and kids hate that language, because in fact,
it implies that somebody needs assistance because you're a pain.
Yeah, exactly. You're a problem, and we need time out from you.
Yes, exactly.
And it doesn't. When you're caring for kids, you're caring for kids, and you want to be in community.
Warts and all, but it's a warts and all,
absolutely.
Isn't it?
And every family, and every child in a family needs to have some time with other adults or with other people. Kids need that, and they need to build long-term relationships that within the family they're living with. The families also need to build long-term relationships in community and in the supportive community. And that's what happens, with people who have their birth children with them. They have friends, family who spend time with the kids. The kids go overnight to people's places. You've got somebody you can call in for half a day if you really need them. And that's what carers need as well. And part of the problem at the moment, and that's what I built, I'll come back to what some of the issues are. And so when we first had our children, that wasn't available. That kind of support wasn't available or funded by the department, or we weren't aware of it. And so we created that for ourselves. And so what we did is we were incredibly lucky, because my daughter had been living with what became her foster grandparents since the age of 8 weeks, till she came to live with us at 18 months.
Right.
And they stayed involved with us, and they took us on. We'd done our training with them, but so we'd met them before. And
did they remain grandparents?
Pardon?
Did they?
They did. They stayed foster grandparents,
Fantastic.
but they took the whole of us on. So
yes, I get what you're saying.
Yeah, the whole family.
Exactly.
And so I was working part-time, and my partner was working part-time. If we needed childcare, they'd look. We'd ring them up if one of the kids was sick, and they'd look after them. They had them once a week. They came to all our family things, and when. The foster grandmother, when she was on her own and she could no longer keep her house, she came to live with us. And my daughter at that stage had her first child, and they moved out together. So that we had this kind of extended family in Adelaide. So we were really lucky, and I also started, when the kids were going to childcare and kindy, I also started a group of women who I knew who were like me, had the same values and same beliefs. They all had partners and 2 children as well, and we called ourselves, we've become the Bad Mothers Group, only half tongue in cheek. You never get it right, and we're still going.
Look, but isn't everyone both a bad and a good?
Yes.
As we've talked before about this, I had said to you that I'm an adopted child too. And there were definitely, it wasn't a smooth sail for my mum. She'd lost 5 children at birth.
Gosh.
And at the last minute, there was a girl having a baby in the same ward as she was, and she said, you can take the baby. 3 months later, she took the child back. And so mum was left in a terrible state of mind. And we came along. Now, I've often said maybe I was the baby that she had originally, the first one that died. And I've always had the saying, it doesn't matter how you got here as long as you got here and found somebody to love you.
Yes, yes, I agree. I agree. I think it's really, that's why I call them my kids.
Well, they are.
You know, they are my kids.
If you bring up a child, they're your child.
Yeah.
My mother explained it to me as a little tiny boy, because I couldn't understand when we got my sister, not my genetic sister, but my sister. And she wasn't pregnant. And I saw other women with the lump in their belly, and I said, Mummy, you know, how come you, with the baby coming? And she said, well, if Auntie Ruth down the road, if she planted a bulb in the ground and then went away and forgot about it, and I came and watered it every day, and it grew into a lovely flower, whose flower would it be? And I apparently said, well, it'd be yours, Mummy. And she said, well, that's just like you.
Yeah. And one of the things another story about my daughter was she came home from reception class. She was the older of the 2, so she would have been 5. And she came home and said to me that the kids were teasing her and saying, that's not your mum and dad. And so I talked to the teacher, who was the same teacher who'd done that up, who then proceeded to do that work with my son. And she called me into the classroom, and I did some work with kids. So I actually said to them, what do mum and dads do? How do you know that they're parents, and what do they do? So we got kids to talk about that. And I said, well, some kids live with people who do all of that, but they weren't born from them. You know, and so then I just talked about the different kinds of parents you could have in different ways. And I think that really helped for her, because you're exactly right.
It's never been an issue for me or my sister, and I don't know quite why it's never been an issue. It's just never been an issue. I've got a lovely photo that my dad gave me of him, very embarrassed. Very embarrassed he was when he said, you said you wanted a photo of me. He gave me a framed photo. And on the back it says, I might cry in a minute, it says, to my Malcolm. That means everything.
Yeah.
And I guess this isn't really what we're talking about, though. We're talking about the situation that life is at the moment, with the fact that it's very difficult to adopt. You have to jump through so many hoops if you're going to foster children.
Yes.
There are so many kids who are looking for love.
Yes.
And it's becoming, I suppose, coloured by what's been going on with child pedophilia, and people now are getting a bit frightened about where you go with children. And so the attention that adults can show children is now being withdrawn because we're fearful of being, you know, branded something else.
Look, I think it's a really fine line, because we have to protect children.
Absolutely.
And they need protection. And
talking about this fine line that there is between people who show affection to kids, some obviously in the wrong way, some in the right way, but as a parent it's very hard to discern, you know, do I go this way or do I go that way? So it's clearly the experience of being with somebody and watching their behaviour with other children, I suppose, and the history knowledge that you have. And we've been talking about the fact that it's very difficult now for people to both adopt and to foster. And you've done quite a bit of work in this area, and you've also now, is it fostered your granddaughter?
I'm called her kinship carer because she's my son's child. I think we have to protect children.
Yes.
We have to make sure they're safe. We can't place them. We can't take them away from parents and place them in a worse situation or where they get damaged or hurt. And so I think it's really important that we put those sorts of checks and balances in place. I think part of the difficulty...
But there's a but here. There's got to be a but. But there are people that would like to look after this. Like, since gay marriage occurred, for example, and there have been couples together forever, so that's no big surprise. But obviously 2 girls or 2 boys can't have babies together, and the need for them to feel a complete family is so important. But it's very difficult for that to happen.
It's starting to happen more regularly. I think that the agencies are starting to employ more, to train and
look
assess and
favourably
train and look favourably at gay couples, yes. So I think that's really important.
It doesn't matter who loves you, it just matters somebody does.
Yeah, I think people have to... What I think is that we need a really robust assessment process, and it needs to be based on... And it needs to be done with people who've got a lot of lived experience as well as the theory. And so you need to actually... And it comes back to what I was talking about, it takes a village. So a lot of carers may have had their own experiences. Their absolute passion and commitment to look after kids comes from that experience. It needs to have been resolved in order for them to be able to give the kids what they need. And so you need a process where you can actually really look at all of that and support people who have got the ability to do it and the capacity to do it in a way that's safe, and provide ongoing support. Because one of the things I'm really interested in is to come back to that stuff about respite and about how do we support carers, because you are working with very complex kids, and a lot of the time in the assessment, even though people say it, you don't realise the impact it's going to have on your life, on your friendships,
of course,
and in what you're doing,
of
because we think we can do that. And so I've been saying that I think we shouldn't do respite the way that we do it at the moment, which is you get some funding for...
Well, hold on a tick. We'll just come back and talk about exactly that point, because it's a very important point to make. See you soon. Susan Lane is our special guest. Susan, just before the break, we were talking about so-called respite.
Yes. So what I want to say really quickly is that carers need an immense amount of support, and they need time for themselves, they need time to go out, they need time to have their hair cut, they need time to go to work. And the way it works at the moment is you only get funding to send the kids to somebody else, for a weekend once a month. And that's not what carers need.
And there is great difficulty in sending them to your friends who aren't all qualified.
Because you have to do the full training to do that. Yep. And so what carers are saying, and what I desperately wanted, was somebody who was in my network to be able to come in and look after the kids.
Family and friends.
I needed maybe people who were mentors who could take the kids to sporting activities and be the person there for them and move them around. Other people need help with gardening or housework. We need more school holiday programs, more holiday camps for the kids. It has to be things that are actually going to be helpful for the kids and are part of the village. Carers do not want to send their kids away to people they don't know, who might have different values.
Yes.
And that's not actually part of what's available to us all at the moment.
So that's the area that you feel passionate about.
I feel absolutely
really
passionate
needs to be looked at and changed.
Yes.
And the government departments handling children, they're really struggling at the moment to keep up with the times as well as everything else. And there are a whole lot
of recommendations about how to do that more flexibly. We've given some, we have actually made recommendations about do that, and there's a lot of evidence that that's the way to do it.
It's to listen to the people that know.
Absolutely. And the last thing I want to say is that every other carer, carers for people with disabilities, carers for people with mental health issues, carers for people with aged parents, young carers, get a sum of money up to $5,000 a year for self-directed respite care for them as carers. We don't get that as carers. Right. Why shouldn't we?
True. because kids are our most valuable resource. They're our future, and we all understand that.
Yes.
Been just fantastic talking with you.
Thank you. Just one more thing. If you do that, you're going to get a lot more carers. If you provide the kind of support and the kind of network and the kind of village around them and work with them to do that, you will get more of the pet carers to provide family-based care for all this group of kids. There's a huge group of kids in South Australia, 4,500 in care at the moment.
And there's more information about that right here. Yeah. Look, thank you for being part of this discussion. We've really just been trying to inform you what's going on in the rest of the world, perhaps in a world that you don't know anything about. Stay with us, folks, on OurTime. It's been great to have your company this time. Keep yourself nice till we see you next time. Bye. Our special guest next time on OurTime is the amazing life of Derrilyn Wood. Derrilyn, how many events have you run in your lifetime?
Oh, probably 1,000, I would say, over the time. And it's not all run by me, it's by our team. I've got wonderful people at my staff. I've had hundreds of staff over the years, which has been marvellous.
And we're talking about life be in it and just what life is for this lady. Next on OurTime, we'd love to see you.